First of all, if you don't have 3 hours to watch this video in its entirety, I suggest that you bookmark it as Watch Later, since if you understand what is being presented, you will not be able to tear yourself away. Because of shadow banning, Trey Smith's channel is very hard to find, and so please subscribe to his channel with the link below. Science was my best subject growing up. I was particularly fascinated by physics and archaeology as well, but the teachers were all ignorant or stupid. Had this medium, the internet, been available in the 50s, things would have been a lot different in my education. What I present following is difficult to find, even when you diligently search for it. It is impossible to find if you don't use the exact terms and phrases. I usually don't post other people's content, but this is so awesome because it exhausts the limits of empirical proof that God and an extrinsic intellect exists, thereby affirming any shaky faith anyone might have. I have stated more than once that I don't need faith because I have proof. The following video presents just a small fraction of that proof. Trey Smith, who is in the league of Chuck Missler and Kent Hovind, is solid in his presentation of biblical and scientific facts. He dispels the myth that science is at odds with faith in God by using science to prove that God is at the center of creation. You may have to watch this more than once to be able to realize the enormity of it all, and I know it is not what I usually do. Trust me, this video is something you'll never, ever forget.
If you were looking for some kind of an ordinary science video, this is not that video. Everything from God to heaven to hell to time to space. When you hear the science guys talking about the theory of everything, we're not talking about the same thing. To dimensions and all that which lies between, from the cells to the stars to the quantum particles, making up the whole. Oh yes, we're going a lot deeper on this one. From angels to fallen angels to demons to devils to even the claimed dragons of ages past, to mankind's origin itself. Buckle your seatbelts. Welcome to the theory of everything. Now, to really dig into this, gotta start with the understanding that it's not just the universe. It's like this enormous Swiss watch. The living organisms in this place are literally made of digital codes, of mechanics that we really don't understand even the tip of the iceberg of. These are actual zip files, DNA strands, that basically open like hyper-intensified life running all over the place to create every single life form on this planet. It's bigger than that. Let me put this in perspective for you. Everything from the fish and the plankton in the sea to the air that you breathe in, the oxygen from the trees to the carbon dioxide that you feed them back in return, to the land animals that crawl on the ground. You and I, right now, while you're watching this video, on the other side of the screen, are on a little bitty blue rock that it's all also symbiotic in an enormous black abyss called space. Everything here is connected to everything else, almost like a cradle that's for the infants. This is not just a few things work together here and there. This is sheer precision in every little piece of every part of this place. Systems built on systems built on systems. Genesis means the point of origin, the beginning, the inception, where what was not becomes what is. It even has its own little force field ozone to keep the atmosphere in. All making a whole. It is all connected from the cells to the stars. Isn't that awesome? And look how thin that is. Beyond imagination. There, sure glad that thing's there. The three greatest mysteries since the very beginning of science have been time, space, and matter. The origin of one should explain the origin of all three. The Rubik's Cube puzzle of science, the Holy Grail. Let's take a crack at it right at the start of this video. The material world is comprised, the very fabric of the material world, made of an atomic world. All of it, from the air that you breathe, to the earth that you're standing on, to the planets. Illusion of reality. And the stars above are all made of an atomic world. Beginning in the 1920s, the era of Einstein, Max Planck, and these other guys, they ran into a serious problem. You dive right beneath that, which is comprised of a subatomic world, a subatomic matrix. And you're in your subatomic world, the place where the numbers go absolutely haywire. When they tried to pinpoint the exact location of subatomic particles, they found that it was utterly impossible. It's in fact at that point that you run into the scary measurement problem that we're going to talk about. Then you would think, if you dug all the way down to the center, that little nucleus guy right there that's floating loose, maybe he would be solid. Nope, same thing. Little dots all poking around so fast, and boom, the spot where the paradox began. Statistical probabilities to make the illusion of the material world. So let's recap this thing just to get a grip on what we're dealing with here. The quantum worlds are literally the framework of this entire place, the thing that we call reality itself. The foundation that actually makes up every single science of this place. So we're in an enormous black abyss of space on a little blue rock of hyper-intensified life and order. In the ancient book of Hebrews, it actually states a very fascinating thing. In the 11th chapter, the 3rd verse, it says, "For we know by faith that it was with words of God that the worlds were formed, that what is seen is made from that which is unseen." Another translation of words is vibrations. As men speak words of sound that go a matter of feet and last only a couple of seconds. Perhaps God himself speaks substance. So is reality totally internalized into the little bitty universe that we live in, or is the scope of things a little bit larger than that? Wasn't it Albert Einstein who said, "Those of us that believe in physics understand that reality is nothing more than a stubbornly persistent illusion"? If that's true, then one might ask, where's the illusion coming from? To answer that question, I'd like to begin by taking a look at this little blue rock. But the current conjectures in most all of science, the most predominant ones at this point, is that the entire place, including the universe right down to the earth, right down to cells in your skin, the DNA strands, and even the fabric, and those quantum worlds, is all a product of sheer absolute randomness. I'd like to take a peek at that. So if you and I are the amazingly intelligent fish within an enormous fish bowl, I guess my first couple of questions would be, how did the fish bowl get there, and how did we get inside of it? In mathematics, anything that is 10 to the 50th power to 1 is considered impossible. It would be an absolute miracle. Just to give you a train of reference for that, 10 to the 82nd power is how many atoms are believed to be in the entire universe. Now, it was Roger Penrose that came up with this number here for the odds of a universe that would produce one planet that could sustain life like the Earth. So if that didn't bother you the first time, let me run it by you one more time again. One impossibility, another impossibility, so let me tell you what this means. Right now, while you're watching this video, by any mathematical construct, possibility, another impossibility, another impossibility, you and I are sandwiched right dead in the center of a place that should not exist. And that's just where we start. And everything in the universe works together as a perfect precision of order to allow the existence of this little blue rock. And everything on this little blue rock are symbiotic relationships to allow us to exist. Everything here is symbiotic. It is all systems that are intimately dependent on other systems. So this is a protein manufacturing line inside the cell. Like, sometimes the key to exactly what you've been looking for is right in front of you, if you take a second to look at it. This is not just a few examples here and there. Literally everything in this place is connected, no matter how loosely, to every other thing in this place, from the food chains and the underwater worlds, the land animals that roam on the ground, to the very cells and the skin and the fabric of this entire place. To get a DNA strand, you have to have the proteins configured properly. Yet to get the proteins, you've got to have the DNA strand. There is no chicken before the egg. And that's just one example of this. Many would argue that the entire place, the construct of the universe, right down to the earth, to the molecular fabric of your skin, is irreducibly complex from bottom to top. Now, entropy, one of the laws of thermodynamics, is that things deteriorate. They decline over time. That's not really complex. We observe this on a day-to-day basis, that organized things tend to deteriorate to chaos over time. They don't seem to improve. Now, with humans, we engineer stuff and we try and tug a war and fight with entropy and build better things, but ultimately systems decline. Our construct, our physical bodies, are made not only just of the particles, which we'll touch on and get into in just a second, but those particles, those little precision units of information, which is what Einstein would have called them. Those little digits are making up the cells, which are as complex as cities. Going to carry it to the nucleus of the cell, which is going to open up and let the RNA carry this DNA RNA delivery system into the heart of the cell. Have you ever noticed that sometimes, to understand the larger scope of something, you've got to actually go surgical for a minute. Get your hands right in the mix. Pay attention to its smallest parts for just a minute. Here, imagine winning the lottery every single day, not missing once. For the next 10,000 years, you would still be nowhere close to that number. Now the odds of one single cell, just one little cell guy, are 10 to the 39,970 to 1, give or take. Now in comparison to that last number, this one looks really small, right? And in mathematics, we know that anything that is 10 to the 50th power to 1 is a mathematical impossibility. There are 10 to the 82nd power atoms believed to be in the entire universe. So how many times does this number fit into that number above? The answer is this: trillions of trillions of trillions of trillions, and this number could keep on going for a long, long ways, times the number of atoms in the universe to 1, against there being one single cell in this place. I went with the lowball numbers on that, by the way. Now the inside of a cell is a living, breathing, high performance, no nonsense, no joke factory. So here's my DNA strand inside the heart of the cell, and these little machine guys come through here in a process called transcription. These things are the size of cities. In fact, the inner world of this cell is larger in its inner world than New York City, with all of its little parts doing very specific precision jobs. And then this next set of machines come through, and they're writing in, they're actually doing copying, which of course, like any factory, it all fits together like a perfect glove. It doesn't have spare factory parts in there. Every little piece is serving a precision role to every other part within the inside of that cell, which would mean, of course, that at its inception, it has to start as a complete piece, otherwise it wouldn't exist at all. In fact, if you took every piece of technology that we have ever made, packed it into a space so small that you could barely see it with our largest microscopes, you would still be light years away from the technology employed in a single cell of this place. And that single cell guy, he's dependent on other things that are beating the exact same odds, or actually larger odds as well. See, he's dependent on things, and those things are dependent on things. Single cell is not just dependent on all of its internal parts, but it's dependent on the external world as well. Other things beating these same type of numbers as if simultaneously, so that all of the parts can function. Accident after accident after accident after accident, and those things are dependent on things, and those things dependent on things, and those things of things, until you realize that all of it is dependent on all of it, beating odds just like these for them to exist at all. Let me put this in perspective for you. Imagine you were that single cell and you have just beat absolute mathematical insanity, and here you come into existence, but immediately you die because all of the other stuff that you're dependent on, it's not in place. Almost like the accidents were, I don't know, coordinated. Every living biological organism on this planet is constructed of little bitty factories. These precision factories are all doing sophisticated operations within the entirety of the cell. Each of those factories has tons and tons of parts that are all working together, doing these little precision jobs, but they're not doing these jobs on their own. These factories need sets of instructions. They need software. All of the parts of the cell are not randomly doing jobs. They're doing it based on digital coding, which is giving instructions to all of the machines. So the machines not only have to be designed to work with the software, but the software has to be designed to give instructions to the machines. So when you hear the scientists marveling, saying, how can this happen on its own? Why are the numbers this bad? The mathematical miracles happening all over the place. That's why the numbers are that bad. At some point on the timeline, order does have to occur because we're here, right? Then it's about to get more intense because the digital coding in your cellular factories is about to have to coordinate and come together. That gets you one single cell and all of the factory parts that are moving inside that cell, and the little digital DNA software running the cell guy on top of the earth that shouldn't be there in the universe that came out of nowhere. But this right here is the point where the accidents have to go sheer precision. That's a human heart right there, surgical. These accidents have got to be shoved violently into hyperdrive. Millions and millions and millions and millions. That is a very sophisticated piece of machinery. You do not want the digital instructions that are all coming together to create that guy. You cannot have trial and error. A little bit off this way, a little bit off that way would be a bad, bad thing. Have got to come together and coordinate of digital code all funneled into a pure live feed. Now all of the digital mastery has got to come together as one complete, creating everything from the bones being written in to the muscles to the air is where the rabbit hole goes really deep. The part where you need the master file. You need body plans which will coordinate all of that software to become that pulls all of it together into one majesty, a body plan, putting together everything from the fingertips to the tongue to the toes and every part in between. And mind you, you need a body plan not just for the human beings, but a separate set of living instructions for every living, breathing species, type, and kind of organism on this planet. And this digital code has got to be a lot more complex than any of our stuff. It has to be three-dimensional and configured properly because it's making three-dimensional biological organisms from scratch. Not only are there no spare parts, not just on human beings, but on any other species of creature on Earth. They're all a precision completeness. But more than that, unlike machines that we make, like computers and things of that type, it can do redundant error correction to make sure that this comes out right. And unlike clunky machines made by man, it can self-heal, like cranes and such, that with time the part will wear out. In the construct of the human condition, the muscles are actually designed to strengthen with use. A literal mastery of biological hardware. But it's not complete until, boom, you got your consciousness. Never forget the cherry on top, right on top of all of it. Sort of like being plugged into Wi-Fi, huh? The real you, and neurons and little connections coming down the spinal cord. Almost like there's something larger going on here than mortgage payments and car notes. Look, here's the paradox. Let me lay it out for you. You can see the hyper-intensified order all inside, every little detail of the place, but you cannot see the source from which that order comes, even if it's dimensionally layered right on top of it. We'll get to that. The very spot within the life sciences, where the matrix of all the little bitty fabric of machines and cells and parts that have come together to make the beautiful construction of these biological machines within the matrix of this place, get smack dab hit with the neurosciences. There is no point within those two sciences alone where you're going to run into the metaphysical, the dimensional, and the spiritual faster than that point, to give all of these precise directions to the parts right at the moments that you think about them. Be some kind of a point of translation. There's got to be a little bit more going on in there than just little electrical connections. In both the Greek and Hebrew texts, it refers to the human body as a temple that are zipping this way and that, not in any random fashion, mind you. The ghost and the machine, the actual intangible conscious being that makes up what you call you, operating through a physical apparatus of the human body. The intangible controlling the tangible, the very spot where some might argue two dimensions meet. Right here in Genesis 1:27, it does say that God created man in his own image. It's a bold statement. And 97% of your entire body is all self-functioning, from the organs to the cells to every single part of your biological machinery. But you're calling the top shots, experiencing the natural world through 5 senses. This is not a trite piece of business. Every second you are taking hold and driving the whole machine by the reins. It's everything from moving the arms to where you're going to walk to your favorite flavor of ice cream. How does something as material as the matter of the mind ever give rise to something as intangible as an experience, an idea, or the live stream continuum of thought, which you call you, is not little bitty. In fact, the neurosciences, which, if you were intellectually honest about it, actually began in ancient Egypt and continue to this day. The tools and toys have gotten better. As Plato or Aristotle or philosophers all throughout the ages of time, even up till this very moment that you watch this video, would have asked, how does the non-physical control the physical? But the paradox is real. The mind, body, duality, the split, the place where you have the blurring of the lines between what they'll call the dimension of consciousness and the material world. In fact, it's not just a blurring fuzziness of the lines. That's the exact point where physical and spiritual twist. Inside this construct, there are billions and billions and billions of neurons that are all acting with little synapses firing this way and that. It's translating. It's a receiver. Nobel Prize winner neurophysiologist Sir John Eccles stated, and I quote, "The human brain is a machine that a ghost can operate, so that you can have control of this entire being, passing down the spinal cord into the fingertips and every part of your biological body." What are we really? What is the soul? But this is more than just a computer sitting on top of a biological machine. Just like you'll hear researchers ask, what is the source for the digital coding that makes up the software, the DNA of human life? This question here is a granddaddy beyond human imagination, larger in scope than that. In fact, the very type of questions that have pushed many of the greatest minds throughout all time to the brinks of their research. Who are we? Where do we come from? What happens next? It was Albert Einstein who said, and I quote, "In consideration of the cosmos, the order of the universe, which I, with my limited human mind, am able to perceive, yet there are those who say there is no God. What makes me really angry is when they quote me in support of such views." That was Albert Einstein. It's very rare that you would ever find any quote where Einstein would say he was angry about anything. Yet so often I hear men quote Einstein and say that there is no God in the same sentence. In fact, this is a lot larger in scope than that. Let me put this in perspective for you. Right now, while you're watching this video, we barely understand even the simplest functionings of the smallest parts of this place. We grapple with the DNA strands. This right here is a whole lot larger in scope than any of that, just within the neurosciences as well as the life sciences sitting right on top. Life sciences, neurosciences, and that human mind and consciousness all meet. There is no point in just those two sciences. Almost like a gateway, huh? We haven't even made it to the quantum physics and the fabric of this place yet. You've probably heard it said that the eyes are the windows to the soul, a statement whose origin is actually derived from Matthew 6:22. But the truth is, the illusion is a lot deeper in scope than that. It's not actually the eyes that see anything at all. The most advanced camera in the world, literally plugged in and tuned to the frequency of the material world. They're collecting the waves of light, which at their base are little quantified digital units, packets of light that enter through the eye. Solidness is an illusion. And when you're looking at something, you're actually seeing every color it's not. You're seeing the color that it rejects. But it's not just about the color of something. If you were to really look at reality the way that it is, it's comprised of zipping little digits, quantized units, 99.9% empty space. It was Nobel Prize winner Niels Bohr, who, mind you, gave us an actual model of the atom, who stated, and I quote, "Those who are not shocked by quantum mechanics have not yet understood it, the fabric of this place, the little data points making up the material world." But it's sufficient at this point to simply understand that what you're looking at is data coming in through the eye, going down the optic nerve, translating into images, and then hits your consciousness, the intangible part of you, plugged in right now, real time, live stream all the time, which is calling the shots on the whole show. This very much implies that the real you is much more than the software, the hardware, or the biological machine. It does seem like there's a little bit more going on here than what meets the eye. Let me ask you this. If your consciousness is separate from your physical body, and your physical body dies, then that would have to mean that you still exist, right? Let that one sink in a minute. Now, in the Greek text of Romans 12:2, it says something fascinating. It says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." Now, when I think about transformed, I sort of think about a caterpillar in this cocoon state. Now, mind you, when the caterpillar goes into that cocoon, it becomes literally a black goo. It loses all body form inside that cocoon, completely changes. How could the caterpillar ever imagine becoming what it was literally born to become? Sometimes I'll hear physicists say that the universe is really large. And my first thought is, compared to what? And we don't know how it does it. How could a body form literally change into something else? Something that beautiful. But yet, it does it. As if it's built right in to the program itself. Imagine for a moment that you were a sperm cell, just a little bitty cell, and here you are and you're headed towards the egg. And imagine that you're conscious, and there is no way you could possibly ever imagine what it was that you were born to become. How could it possibly know that it was about to go from its little bitty tiny world to one beyond imagination? Now, as that sperm cell, you could easily look at other sperm cells that have gone over into a corner or someplace where they've sort of gathered over here or over here. You could easily get scared or sidetracked. It's a big place. Or you can come into perfect alignment with what you're designed to become. Line straight up, keeping your eyes on the prize of that egg, going straight forward, and by that mechanism, become a victor born to emerge. By the way, even despite the larger scope, which we're going to look at, that does mean that you were a winner at the very start of this thing. No matter how you cut it, that right there is God's greatest gift of a birthday present. You don't get to pick it from the start, but you do get to decide what you're going to do with it and what voices you're going to listen to. The gatekeeper against, shall we say, any little pushy things. But before we can go larger in scope and look at the full scale of what we're dealing with, I'd like to take a peek at evolution, which states that all of this that we've just discussed came out of sheer randomness. This is important because these are two entirely different paths. With one, the evolution, we just keep getting lucky. Lotto win after lotto win. But bottom line, random accidents keep mysteriously hitting lotto wins. And it's all internalized. What you see is what you get. And science and the disconnect, possibly, between the two of them. Or it's larger in scope, and precision information has a source. The definition of science actually is the study of the material and physical world and universe based on observation, experimentation, and investigation. So let's investigate it. So, right from the beginning of this thing, we're going to give evolution some really, really big head starts, beginning with the universe itself. At first glance, the universe can sort of look like maybe it's a random place, but in fact, we have known for a long time now that the universe is very far from random. This is commonly termed as the anthropic principle. In fact, more than that, if you were to really look at the physics of this place, you would find 1% off this way, 1% off that way is a bad, bad thing. You and I would not be talking at all. Anthropic means that it has to be exactly the way that it is for us to exist. More than that, when it comes to, say, the cosmological constant, you wouldn't even find an atheist physicist who would tell you that they believed that one was accidental. The fine-tuning of the universe is not a little bitty issue. But nonetheless, we're going to start with the whole package. Evolution gets the universe, the whole construct and shebang with all of its precision from the beginning for free. And within the inside of that universe, we're throwing in the Earth as well. Don't worry about that big number there and all of those impossibilities. We're tossing it into the package for free for evolution as well. Evolution does also appear to defy entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, that things decline over time. We see species go extinct. We don't have one recorded example of a new species ever becoming, but we do have plenty of examples of species going away. The dinosaurs would be an example of that. So it violates entropy, but don't worry, we're gonna go ahead and give evolution a free pass on that one as well for the purpose of this. It is true that evolution also violates biogenesis, which states, of course, that life only comes from other life. Evolutionist Sir Fred Hoyle stated, and I quote, that believing that the first cell arrived by chance and accident is like believing that a tornado could sweep through a junkyard and create a Boeing 747. It's not just species that we don't see becoming, but on the cellular level, we've never seen a cell come from anything other than another cell. Now, just like entropy, we see cells go away, we see them mutate and die, but never see a cell become. And just like the cell, we've also never seen a DNA strand come on its own. A digital coding for life, any kind of life, even the smallest form of life, we've never seen the digital coding become. That's another problem. And you need both simultaneously. But for the purpose of this, we're going to do that. It gets the cell and it gets the coding both combined from the start. So I need the digital coding for life to happen from inorganic materials somehow, whether it be as sort of a volcano did it, or others propose lightning struck and produced the digital coding, or if you want to view that things were shaking around in sort of a cosmic soup, by some mechanism, I need actual sophisticated code that is tens and tens and tens of thousands of times more advanced than this laptop and the entire computer setup combined in every single strand. It can't have any junk code in there. It's got to be tit for tat on every line, because the digital software is making up the living instructions, click by click by click, line by line, for life itself. But even though the three-dimensional digital coding for just one single strand of DNA is really incredibly complex for us, that's just where it begins to get tough, because now I've got to have trillions and trillions of strands of digital software come together like a perfect glove, coordinating in each precision piece to create little bitty fingers and little arms and little legs and little bitty toes Then I need different kinds of software to all come together for every type of tissue, for the nervous system, for all of the functionality, including the human mind itself, every organ, every cell, every system, all built and comprised and pulled together from digital software, including all of the billions of neurons that make up the brain. And then, as the final touch, you need the miracle of miracles itself, consciousness. It does sort of seem like an awful lot of very mysterious accidents. Was Dr. Chuck Missler, a man who received congressional appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy, was a former branch chief for the Department of Guided Missiles, serving on the board of directors of a dozen companies, CEO of 6 of them, helping the Ford Motor Company, where he established the world's first international industrial computer network, and of course becoming one of the largest, at one point, shareholders for Western Digital, who stated, and I quote, "It is only when one becomes truly knowledgeable of science itself that one becomes extremely comfortable with the book of Genesis. But don't worry about biogenesis. For the purpose of this test of evolution, not only are we kicking entropy out of the mix, but we're kicking biogenesis out of the mix as well. Not only that, but I'm going to give evolution all of the digital coding that it needs from the start. I'm not going to require it to have lightning bolts or cosmic soups. I'm going to give it to it for free from the start. We're also going to need our symbiotic relationships as well. Everything here, most especially the biological living life forms on this planet, are dependent on all sorts of systems. But there went up a mist from the whole earth and watered the face of the ground. If we were intellectually honest about it, the symbiotic relationships that we would need, particularly for the biological stuff in a single cell to exist in this place, would be trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of things when we really began to poke through and see how many things was actually dependent on. And to be intellectually more honest about it, would probably turn out to be the entirety of all of the systems on the earth itself, or a significant portion of those systems. But just to keep this simple for this test of evolution, we're going to toss all of that stuff out of the mix. In Genesis 1:11 it states, "And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind." Single cell, again, the odds of one cell in this place are 10 to the 39,970 to 1 for one single cell. Of course, anything over 10 to the 50th power in mathematics is considered absolutely absurd. They're believed to be 10 to the 82nd power atoms in the entirety of the universe. But for the purpose of this, we're going to have to, at bare minimum, give our test the symbiotic relationship of at least the plants. "And tree yielding fruit, whose seed was already in itself after his kind also. And God saw that it was good." We definitely need the plants because we're breathing oxygen in. These plants are really, really critical. Now, we need many, many things that are beating those same odds coming into existence simultaneously, like these guys here. And if we were to actually take a deep look into the plants, we're going to find that the systems for the plants that are running the seeds are symbiotic systems as well. You don't get the plant without the seed. And the seed, mind you, is a biological program as well. It's got all of the coding intact with no spare coding to make a plant or a tree. It's got to have all of its little parts doing all of their little jobs from the start. But nonetheless, for the purpose of this test, it gets the cell, it gets the seeds, it gets the trees, it gets the coding, it gets to violate the entropy, which we observe every single day, that things decline over time, not improve. You and I are also going to give it a free pass on all of the lotto wins that it's got to redundantly win. We're going to give it as many of those as it needs, time and time again, for the purpose of this test, as well as allowing it to ignore all of the symbiotic relationships which would have to develop simultaneously. There's another real big one that we're going to have to kick out of the mix. Mendel's laws of genetics. Sort of a large third strike, as well as their modern day refinements. It's not like we just started studying genetics yesterday. We're talking about biological software, and I hate to even compare DNA strands to any of our stuff. For example, DNA uses 4-bit code. Our computer software uses 2-bit binary code, little ones and little zeros. This is 4-bit. This is 3-dimensional. Each different type of strand of genetic software, the odds against it existing are 1 in 48 with 48 zeros behind it. So that's 1 in 48 octillion to 1 against each piece of digital software existing at all. The programming software has got to work seamlessly with these cellular factories, which in their inner worlds are more tit-for-tat precise, more efficient than any computerized automated factories on the planet Earth. The list of these things could keep on going. DNA is the literal software, the living programming, line by line specific for every single cute, soft, warm, and cuddly, and even the strangest of things. Bottom line, DNA is the software which makes up all of the different types and kinds of species on this planet. Each creature has exactly the coding that it needs to become whatever type, kind, or species of creature that it is. There is no junk code in DNA, nor is there junk code in the cells which the DNA software runs inside of, or the organs which those cells make up, or the entire functional systems of the living biological organisms themselves. And every type of creature has 0 mutating parts on its body that would hinder its chances for survival. If it had things mutating, even worse, if it gets any type of genetic defect or mutation, any type of randomness introduced into this precision, tit-for-tat, line-for-line coding, can not only injure the creature, it can kill it. That's all just the baseline stuff. If we were to leave Mendel's laws of genetics into this test of evolution, that would, let's just say it kicks up the toughness for this guy here another few trillion notches. The genetic software that makes up a bunny rabbit is entirely different from that makes up a turtle. The two cannot mate. It is a software disconnect. When you're dealing with biological software, just like dealing with regular software, programs and files, the coding has to match up, line by line by line. Now, different programs have different coding, and they're only designed to work with specifically the coding that works with each program. The genetic coding, the actual digital software inherent in dogs, at least naturally, without any engineering done, any intelligence or any mucking with the code, the software inherent in dogs will only work or produce other breeds, other kinds of dogs. It's only compatible with other dog types. Mendel's laws of genetics apply to every species type on this planet. There's specific body plans, from the smallest little things that creep and crawl to the largest creatures on the face of the planet Earth. Same thing applies with horses and those that breed horses. With horses, the genetic code inherent in these creatures is only compatible and can only produce, by any natural cause, other breeds of horses. These genetic laws are particularly important when you're dealing with animals that look very, very similar, if not identical, in many, many ways. They may even have parts within their bodies that are absolutely identical to one another. Appearances can be deceiving, just like if you had two separate factories with similar or identical machines in each one, yet both factories are running different genetic software. You probably heard it said that horses, or animals that were like horses, wanted to reach tree branches, which were way up high, so the horses over time grew longer and longer necks so that they could get at those taller branches, eventually becoming giraffes. The truth is that the genetic coding for a giraffe and its biological systems are not even remotely close to the systems of that of any type of horse. Just like with computer software, you need a source for every single line of code. Coding does not grow, it does not magically appear, whether it be biological coding or whether it be computer coding. And if you're missing code, if any of the digits are off, your system crashes, your animal is in trouble. It's not the little train that thought it could. This is real coding that you need for every part, including a different circulatory system. This is not just wishful thinking, I want to click up a larger neck. This is real. You need actual tit for tat for tit for tat, line for line for line for line, digital coding for every cell, every function, every part. All the way down the neck of this animal are blood vessels, arteries, which have literal valves. This is going to take more walls of digital coding that will shut off and keep blood so that when it goes down for a drink of water, it will not pass out, which would most definitely injure its chances of survival. If it's trying to run or get away, or it passes out and drowns in the pool of water, or if the animal simply passes out every time it goes down for a drink. It's also got special sponge-like material on its mind to capture blood in. Those take more software so that when its neck goes up and down, that it will not, again, pass out and go unconscious. And to run these extra apparatus of the long neck, it needs a 2.5 foot long heart, give or take. Entirely different heart, that's going to be a bunch of these, pumping all of that circulatory blood through this long neck. This isn't just a couple of little knickknacks that are different. This animal has an entirely different body plan. Software after software after software. If it were missing one piece of any part of this animal, the giraffe, would not exist. Once again, from inorganic material, I need trillions of lines of precision three-dimensional software to mysteriously appear. And all of the precision factory machines to ultimately become a giraffe. It cannot stop there. From the inorganic material, it's got to also make trillions of more lines of code. The unbelievable machinery that has to go through and do all of the reading and the duplicating to make complete baby elephants from inorganic material. But the inorganic material definitely cannot stop there. Bukus and bukus and bukus. Point by point, no nonsense precision in every piece. Bunches of more living, breathing, biological machines to somehow just strangely become. Cells are not just factories, they are literal, living, breathing cities. Look at that thing go. Whirlwinds more coding to make lions, alligators, and the most vicious things on the planet Earth. Rivers more code. From more inorganic material to make even the cutest of things on this planet, as well as every single living, breathing creature on the face of the planet Earth. It's a lot of lightning bolts. In the construct of this place, the matrix of the material world, this thing that we call reality, the entirety of little particles which make up the universe, everything here is a causality, a cause and an effect. This becomes particularly important in science when you can see the effect of something, but you cannot see the larger scale of what caused it. You know, it's also true that a created thing can never understand the scope of what created it. At the inception of the book of Genesis, it starts with a fascinating statement that says, "In the beginning, the God of gods, Yahweh, created everything." Now, the use of the word God in the Hebrew, in that sentence, Yahweh, means something a lot larger in scope than Zeus or a man in the clouds with a lightning bolt. It's actually stating in the text that our dad is larger and more unimaginable in scope than the construct of every single three-dimensional particle pixel in the quantum live feed of little dots making up the precision framework of this present illusion, the fabric of the entire place. And the text goes on to say, "And the earth was without form and void." Now, in the original Hebrew, that sentence actually reads, "And the earth had become without form and void." as if to indicate that the place itself, the entire construct, is older than where our story begins. It goes on to say, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Now, many commentators have speculated on that passage that it's talking about the water and the oceans, and that is a possibility. What's interesting is that the word darkness is a very heavy metaphor word. You know, I'm wondering if the text is referring to just regular darkness, or if it's referencing something a little deeper than that. And the word waters, or celestial waters, in every ancient culture meant the entirety of the universe, the place where the stars are. So it states, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light. Now the word light is another extremely heavy metaphor word, and God saw that the light was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. What's funny is that even as a human and designing something on a computer per se, what I'll do when I begin a new project is I'll separate my old stuff from my new stuff and make a clean slate. It's at that point in the text that you begin with your dramatic rise in order in the place itself. This systematic rise, almost as systematic and step-by-step precise as the order which rises when a DNA strand opens to become a living, breathing life form. Whatever the case, let's swim a little further upstream and see if we can't get our head up above the water. It is true that inorganic material, no matter how much you shake it or cosmic soup it, does not generally start spitting out digital coding. Even dealing with the smallest little microbes on the face of the planet Earth, like this little virus of E. coli that I've got going on the screen right here. The software has got to be a pre-programmed match on every line, just like in a computer program. And they can only interbreed within their kind, like viruses do lateral gene transfers, just as dogs and other animals can only mate within or share genes within their specific track of animals. Turtles with turtles, bunny rabbits with bunny rabbits. Bottom line, whether you're dealing with the littlest bug, the largest buffalo, or the pristine pinnacle of human life itself, you are gonna need the source code. Tuck the fact that I brought up viruses into the back of your mind. Little bitty guys that like to come into a cell like a little bitty missile and convince the host that their voice is the one that the cell should be listening to it before they crawl in there and create a tumor or a cancer and add their code to the mix. Just like what happens on computer software when a virus wiggles its way in. Perhaps also when arriving at the dimensional scope of things, you not only have larger scale issues, but perhaps as well there are little buggers and unfriendlies in dimensional structures as well. Oh, one more little bitty detail before I forget. The amalgamation of 66 ancient documents that we call the Holy Bible is redundant to express one single message over and over and over and over again, that the scope of what's going on here is larger than the planets or the stars or the molecular fabric of the skin or even the quantum particles that make up the matrix of the whole place. That what the creator of the heavens and the earth is interested in has nothing to do with the software, the hardware, or the biological bag of parts that we call a human body, or the roller coaster ride of minutes that we define as a human life. But the scope, the precious treasure, the gem amongst the darkness that he is seeking out and looking for. He's interested in the real deal, the point that's calling all the shots for the whole puppet show of precision parts. He's interested in the real you. But according to those ancient pages, it doesn't matter whether you feel like you got served up 1 coin at the start of this life or 10, where you came from or what place on the planet Earth you may have been born. In truth, the particles that make up the human construct are no different than those that make up the bunny rabbit, the turtle, or the ground beneath your feet. But the scope of the differences in the human conscious condition are larger than the light year separator between the intellectual capacities between us and any other living, breathing creature on the face of the planet Earth. But according to those pages, we are born above things that even these primitive eyes that see like cameras are blind to. What I'm saying is this: appearances can be deceiving. The world you see with your eyes, this place couched in a much larger spiritual, dimensional reality. The masquerade of particles pretending to be the illusion of the material world. You know, it is true that whether it be a king or a father, you generally see what someone will do with little before you give them much. But greater still, according to those pages, the real you, behind the machine, infancy stage, you were born to be heir to an empire. The beautiful test, that's precisely what those pages are saying. Just thought I'd mention it. But before we start looking at a larger scope or a smaller scope, in this test of evolution, we're going to have to kick Mendel's laws of genetics out of the queue. They conflict with evolution. Now, Mendel was a contemporary of Charles Darwin. Both men lived and worked in roughly the same time period. Mendel's laws of genetics would go on to be, well, the practical day-to-day observable sciences that are used even this very hour that you're watching this video. They're dependent on sciences because they're observable. We can watch them day after day after day after day after day. Whereas Charles Darwin's theory of evolution would go on to violate lengthy lists of other sciences. For example, in Darwin's day, it was believed that life could spontaneously generate by many, many folks. For example, if a mold were to appear, perhaps it had spontaneously generated. Of course, we now know that spontaneous generation does not occur. It was Dr. A. Fleischmann, zoologist at Erlangen University, who stated, and I quote, "The theory of evolution suffers from the gravest of defects, which are more and more apparent as time advances. It can no longer square with practical scientific knowledge. The law of information systems. Information always has a source." Dr. David A. Kaufman, University of Florida, Gainesville, stated, "Evolution lacks a scientifically acceptable explanation for the source of the precisely planned coding within cells without which there can be no proteins, hence no life. Specified complexity sort of goes hand in hand with the law of information systems. What you're looking at is specific information. Click, 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 click. It is not random, a little bit this way, a little bit that way. It is direct, streamlined instructions that build living biological organisms. Irreducible complexity. The entirety of that organism is comprised of organs and parts, all of which it needs. Those parts are comprised of cells, which require all of their parts. Those cells are run by digital software, which require all of their coding from the information systems to run the inside of the cells. All of these parts are made of quantum particles, which are not random either. It is irreducibly complex from bottom to top. Statistical mathematics is not evolution's friend by any stretch of the imagination. Natural selection. If you have two dogs, bald dog, hairy dog, snowstorm comes through, environment changes, I lose my bald dog, I've got less dogs than I started with. Natural selection, or survival of the fittest, goes hand in hand with entropy. As environments change, resources go away, you see species drop off of the map. This is why we observe species die or leave, but we do not see new species become. Natural selection is not a friend of evolution. The fossil record. Tom Kemp of Oxford University stated, and I quote, "As is well known, most fossil species appear instantaneously in the fossil record." Genetic complexity, information theory. The truth is that if we were to really go through the entire list of places where there's a 180-degree conflict with evolution, we would be here for weeks. So I'm going to rip all of it out right this second, toss it to the side, level playing field. Let's put evolution to the test. It was in 1859 that Charles Darwin proposed the origin of species. Things evolve into other things. So see the dog, he jumped in the water, and he is deciding he's going to sort of grow these fin-like things. See, so the dog ultimately turned into a whale. See how the theory works? Now, mind you, in 1859, when this was proposed by Darwin, it was believed at that time that a single cell was as complex as a ping pong ball. And God created great whales and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kinds. So here's one of the proposed charts or ascent transition lines for evolution, and you can see the drawing here is indicating that the fish is growing arms, which are going to form a different head and become a tail, and now it's getting fingers down here. The problems with this are intrinsic, beginning with, of course, the digital programming code of DNA is just like software coding for a program. If a program picks up any junk code, error code, or mutation code into any of the lines of its complete coding, it will by no means make a better program. Even a single human finger is beyond imagination in precision programming scope, but the problems are larger than even the genetics. For practical example, you may have heard it said that dinosaurs became birds. A bird's wings make the neck on the giraffe look like absolute child's play. You are talking about going from a functional leg on an animal into an apparatus, a functional apparatus that flies. If you took every piece of sophisticated military hardware for aviation that we have ever devised, collaborated them into one single entity or organism, you would be nowhere close to the sophistication of the systems on one single species of bird. Our best technology, some of it extremely impressive, but also in terms of practical reality, primitive, sort of clunky, as well as resource consuming, inefficient, and often very catastrophic by comparison to this creature right here. Majesty of just one of these biological masterpieces. The birds sort of make the whole flying thing look easy, don't they? Not to mention the fact that if you've got a leg becoming a wing, it's going to be a bad leg long before it makes a good wing. If an animal was mutating in any way, that's going to injure its chances for survival. Not one change of species into another is on record. We cannot prove that a single species has ever changed. That quote is from none other than Charles Darwin himself. Now, each program on this screen has exactly the coding inside of it that it needs at the very start. Otherwise, the program would not exist. So if I've got a monkey that is slowly turning into a person, there has to be actual cellular coding for every little tiny piece of the transition, just like these computer programs on this screen will only open to become what they are because their lines of software coding only have the specific line for line instructions to open and become whatever the program is. You need precise code for every single line, because just like computer software, this coding has no extra instructions for making spare parts. It has exactly inside those digital instructions the coding that it precisely needs to make the organism exactly as it is, with no spare coding. What do you imagine might occur if I took one of these programs on this screen and began adding random lines of mutant junk code to one of these programs on this screen? Would it increase and make the program evolve to become a better program? Or, option B, do you think that adding random code, junk code, and mutation code to precision genetic software might not ever get a dog to change body plans and all of its genetic coding and become a whale? So what do you think? If we were to add junk code to one of these pieces of software, one of these programs, does the program fall apart, or does it become a better program? And whatever the case, evolution is stating that random accidents in the precision genetic coding began to accidentally spit out every direction and every kind of creature and species on the planet Earth. Despite the entropy, biogenesis, and all of Mendel's laws of genetics, and also ignoring all of these basic day-to-day observable sciences, one would anticipate that the evidence for all of these transitions, which would have to occur, spitting out mutant animals and creatures in every conceivable direction, should be readily available and easy to find within the fossil record. Strangely though, the evidence on the entire face of the whole planet Earth for all of this science-defying activity seem to be primarily confined to this single set of monkey bones. Jeffrey Schwartz, in his book Sudden Origin, stated, and I quote, "Given that evolution, according to Darwin, was in a continual state of motion, it follows logically that the fossil record should be rife with examples of transitional fossils leading from less to more evolved. Yet instead of filling in the gaps in the fossil record with so-called missing links, most paleontologists have found themselves in a situation where there are only gaps in the fossil record, with no evidence of transformational intermediate between documented fossil species." So despite just what Charles Darwin said in his own day, that there is no evidence of species changing from one to another, and the fossil record working to further illustrate that animals stay within their spectrums, not seeming to have fossils that change into one another. Ian Eldridge stated in his book, The Myths of Human Evolution, and I quote, "The fossil record flatly fails to substantiate the expectation of finely graded changes over time." Despite all of that, the fossil record and all of the sciences, let's go a tad bit deeper, because one would think if you were going to search for evolution, surely you would find it in the simplest of insects. Now, it is true that since the early 1900s, almost 100 years now, we've been doing fruit fly experiments. Tens of thousands, probably millions of generations of fruit flies at this point have been bred in labs, and they do all sorts of weird stuff to them to try and encourage mutations. They're trying to get them to have a mutation that has a genetic benefit as well as pass it on. Basically, they're trying to prove evolution. At this point, with tens of thousands of these that have occurred, the statement that arrives from the fruit fly experiments is that they appear to be immune to evolution. And they use the fruit flies because they have short lifespans, about 11 days. And on top of that, the flies are really inexpensive. They're cheap. In fact, was it not Morris Colry who said, out of our 400 mutations, there's not one that can be called a new species? Or Norman Macbeth, who quoted, "If 1,000 mutations were combined all into one specimen, we still would not have a new species." So this guy here is a motor protein headed towards the nucleus of the cell on these little bitty highways that, or perhaps you may prefer Francis Hitching, hardcore atheist, mind you, who stated, and I quote, "The fruit flies refuse to become anything other than fruit flies under any circumstances yet devised." He's battery charged by the mitochondria. Or, just for good measure, how about Gordon R. Taylor, who stated, "It's striking that geneticists have been breeding fruit flies for more than 60 years all around the world, flies which produce a new generation every 11 days. Yet they have never seen the emergence of even as much as a new enzyme." And these guys here are little bitty turbines which are turning and they're powering billions of little mitochondria batteries. But even if you find deterioration in the insects and you can't find evolution in them, surely at least you could find some kind of improvements happening even in the microscopic world of the little bitty cells, wouldn't you think? And it's not just the fruit flies that they've been trying this mutation thing on, mind you. Michigan State University evolutionary biologist Richard Linsky and his colleagues have searched for signs of evolution in bacteria, single-celled bacteria now for more than 20 years, tracking more than 40,000 generations. And in the end, right now up until today, every part of the cell is doing a job that functions. Some other part have been, at bare minimum, just lateral most in sheer volume, degenerative. A fact which caused University of Bristol bacteriology professor Alan Linton to state, "Where's the experimental evidence? None exists." In the entire history of mankind, more importantly, the history of science itself, on the entire earth, there's not one experimental example to date of a cell mutating one single upward notch of function or new improvement. And it's not for lack of trying, interestingly enough. Where's the experimental evidence? Alan Linton continues. None exists. Bacteria with generation times of 20 to 30 minutes. But throughout the 150 years of the science of bacteriology, there is no evidence that one species of bacteria has ever changed into another, despite the fact that populations have been exposed to potent chemical and physical mutagens. The cell needs all of its parts to function. Those parts all work together as a whole. If something comes in, like a virus attacks the cell, or the cell mutates for some reason, this not only can injure its chances of survival, but more than that, can actually kill the cell, can destroy the cell. It has to be healthy and functional with all of its pieces doing their jobs. If something comes in and interferes with that, it doesn't become a better cell. Alan continues, since there is no evidence for species changes between even the simplest forms of unicellular life, is it not surprising, he continues, that there is no evidence for evolution throughout the whole array of multicellular life on this planet? That was Dr. Alan Linton. The biological life forms on this planet are not just comprised of little bitty cellular factories that are more sophisticated than every single automated factory on Earth combined into a space so small that you can barely see it with our largest microscopes, and then run with digital precision software. But the inside of those cells are made of little bitty machines all doing things so that you and I can even exist at all. It was Dr. Doug Axe and Dr. Ann Gauger that came up with these numbers here. Assuming you started with your complete cell, your complete Earth, and you've got your digital software running inside the cell, now you need coordinated mutations, coordinated accidents to occur within these strands on the DNA. So, to get 6 coordinated mutations to produce one new beneficial function on the inside of a single cell would take 16 billion years. 16 billion years is the currently believed age of the entire universe. I didn't like their numbers, so I kicked it way up. Why not? The 1 trillion coordinated mutations. That would be almost enough for one earthworm, give or take, on this planet, which shouldn't mathematically be here. If we were to speed him up, he's actually walking a lot faster than that. I don't know. It just doesn't look random to me. You know, I'm thinking that the answers could very easily be a little bit larger in scope. Maybe the history of the place could bring some illumination. This is Dr. Jack Horner. Now, Jack was a technical advisor in the 1991 movie Jurassic Park. He was doing an archaeological dig when they found...
The scientific world is still reeling from the discovery of actual Tyrannosaurus rex cells and soft tissue unearthed last week at a Montana excavation site.
Now, since that first discovery of actual soft tissue inside T-Rex bones, I've heard many commentators suggest that to get the date of extremely alive-looking soft tissue, like this actual image of T-Rex soft tissue on the screen right here, you don't want to actually test the meaty-looking dinosaur tissue itself. That would be a big no-no. What you want to do, apparently, is test the rocks which are around the soft tissue. You don't want to test the soft tissue. You want to test the rocks which are around the soft tissue. Well, I mean, the elephant in the room is that when you're dealing with tissue that looks that fresh with blood vessels, then your animal is probably not 65 million years old. Here's how long living tissue lasts, and somewhere 3 or 4 football fields that way is 65 million years.
You know, Mary, when I was reading about this story, I was amazed that in some of the capillaries, when you went to pull them, they snapped right back. Are you amazed at the quality of these remains?
Absolutely.
70 million years old, huh?
It's just doesn't seem possible. But yes, you can actually take the vessels, and they do have internal components, and so you can take a probe and kind of squeeze those things out into solution, and the vessels are fine. It's just, I can't explain it, to be honest.
Very cool.
I have a lot of respect for Jack Horner. Let me put this in perspective for you. This man here on the screen released a discovery that he made which disagrees with many of his own conjectures about dinosaurs. You got to admit, though, Jack, despite all of the agendas or voices that may be out there concerning fossils, it's almost like somebody placed the bigger thing right in the palm of your hand. But in truth, it's not just the old T-Rex that soft tissue is being discovered inside of. For example, this 70 million year old mosasaur tissue found. Or perhaps this claimed 80 million year old hadrosaur on the screen right here. Look at how gooey and fresh that tissue looks right there on the screen. The list of these could keep on going, and the truth is, I'm not terribly surprised. The word dinosaur or dinosauria, meaning terrible lizard, did not exist until 1841. Prior to that, the name was dragon, meaning the big lizard that you definitely do not want to run across. It's not just that there are redundancies of drawings of these things all over the face of the planet Earth, but there are thousands of writings about these creatures and sculptures found everywhere from the smallest little bitty tribes to the largest empires. In truth, who could actually count how many dragon stories that there are on the face of the planet Earth, accompanied with drawings of the creatures? In fact, the old science book Historia Animalium claims that in the 1500s, dragons, dinosaurs, were extremely rare, but were still existent at that time. You couldn't make this stuff up. Alexander the Great wrote about dinosaur dragons in India. Herodotus, the Greek historian from the 4th century BC, often called the father of history itself, not only wrote about dragons, but did a fantastic job giving descriptions of these creatures and gave a step-by-step walkthrough of how the Egyptians would smoke out the pterodactyls from the trees. Aristotle, Greek philosopher from the 3rd century BC, also gave eyewitness accounts to these large reptile creatures, dragons, as well as descriptions of the flying lizard similar to the thunderbird or pterodactyl head found at the top of Indian prayer sticks. Marco Polo, the explorer from the 12th to 13th century AD, gave incredible accounts about large dragon beasts in the chronicles and records of his journeys. And we can be pretty certain that they weren't telling these dinosaur dragon stories as myths, because we've got the bones for them. Complete with the gooey, fresh and soft dragon tissue. I could pretty easily be persuaded to believe that the person that drew all of these lines on this Ica stone right here knew what a Triceratops looked like. And here's a guy riding on top of a Triceratops. Any man brave enough to hop onto the back of a Triceratops is absolutely worthy of the honor to be drawn on a rock. I think it would also be extremely difficult to convince the Asian cultures that there weren't dragons. In truth, you could spend hours going through all of the inscriptions found all across the ancient world. And the amazing thing is how remarkably similar many of the reliefs are to actual bone structures that we find fossilized underneath the earth. Look at this enormous Chinese lizard grabbing hold of that deer right there. In fact, the Chinese zodiac has 11 regular day-to-day animals on it, as well as 1 dragon. You know the real fascinating thing about dinosaurs, though? They're found underground, mixed in under there with other animals that we still see every day. So if I've got a real big animal that's on top of the ground and it dies, how does it get buried underneath the earth? If an animal dies on the surface of the ground, whether it be a giraffe, I mean, it can't sink down there. I mean, this is a real big animal. Or a bronchiosaurus on top of the ground. Solar dust can't fall on it. How does something this size get down there? These enormous animals are commonly found in mass underground dinosaur graveyards, literal mass burials, as if the creatures were herding and whatever happened all at once, fast and unexpected. If it dies on the surface, it's just going to decompose and other things are going to come along and eat it. It's definitely not going to sink down under the earth, become compressed, and turn into a fossil on its own. Now, it is true that liquefaction would do that. I mean, it would throw all sorts of stuff underneath the ground, including your fossilized fish, your dinosaurs, and all of these big animals. And it would even divvy up your strata if you had water that was pumping around and loosening up the sediments of the ground, and then you'd get your layers. But for that to happen, you would need an awful lot of water. And these guys here would settle in to those different strata, pumping around on the surface of the ground.
This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched claw. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture.
The 12 stone tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest written epic in the world. The actual records of the king of Uruk, believed to be one of the oldest settlements following the global flood, which is one of the focal points of the entire document.
Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska.
This is a Sumerian king's list, which not only tells us about a worldwide global flood, but also gives us a helpful hand with maybe the date.
The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours.
There are 277 flood stories from cultures around the globe. Some will argue that number's more like 2,000. But any way you cut it, there are a lot of flood stories, including a man and his 3 sons and their wives surviving a global flood on a boat. There's only one text on the face of the planet Earth that gives the measurements of that vessel. That would most definitely be the Hebrew text of the book of Genesis. Measurements given to us in the book of Genesis for Noah's Ark are given to us in cubits. You've got the Egyptian cubit, the Babylonian cubit. Now, a cubit is thought to be the measurement from the tip of the finger to the elbow. So, what is that? For the sake of argument, I went with the lowest possible numbers for the measurement of Noah's Ark and its interior. Amphibians, well, I mean, they're amphibians. The survival mechanisms on many animals are just astounding. Did you know that certain types of frogs, like this wood frog here, can actually freeze in a pond over the entire winter and reanimate, literally come back to life? So the craft itself is 75 foot wide, would be 450 feet in length all the way to the end of that boat down there, and it would be 45 feet, 3 stories tall. So at its smallest possible measurements, that's longer than a football field by a lot. Now, insects will definitely fit on the boat. There's no argument about that part of it. But I mean, when it comes to insects, they'll pretty much make it through anything, or their larvae, or hitch a ride on all of the floating stuff. Cockroaches will survive anything. Just like in Mendel's laws of genetics, how many genetic lines of parent creatures do I need to create the spectrums and arrays of animal species that we see on this planet? So this is roughly your layout. You've got 98% sea life, amphibians, insects, bacteria, and actually those numbers would probably be larger than that if you tossed in all of your different funguses and plant life as well, in comparison to the qualifying animals that you would need on that vessel, which would be your land mammals, reptiles, and birds. The Russian silver fox experiments, going on now for more than 50 years, are one of the more beautiful examples of animals, in this case foxes, producing, limited to their genetic kinds, the array of variables and appearances within animal types. Look at this first silver fox here. Now look at this silver fox, as well as these cute little silver fox variations produced within the 50-year ongoing Russian silver fox experiments. This is commonly termed as microevolution, meaning that the species can work with pre-existing code within their animal kinds, which is grandly different than Darwinian evolution, where things are becoming other creatures and transforming. These animals are restricted within their animal kinds. Bottom line, this fox can have other variations of foxes, but its genetic coding does not contain the information to turn into a whale. Actually, genetically speaking, everything on this planet is losing genetic information. This is particularly observable in viruses, but in all the creatures on the planet, we're actually degrading, just like with entropy, and losing species counts. The current numbers on extinction rate are anywhere between 1,000 species a year to 10,000 between all of these types of creatures, and depending on whose numbers that you listen to, but we're certainly losing things and not gaining them. And the same applies to our genetic coding. So, in theory, if you rewound time, the genetic coding in the past, further up this line, would be stronger. Whatever the case, it was John Woodmarappy that came up with these numbers here. You would need 8,000 genera, actual couples, or 8,000 family kinds to produce the spectrums of creatures that we see on this planet right now, today. That number makes provision for the extinction rate, as well as, interestingly enough, he packed in all of the dinosaurs into that figure, by the way. So I went with the smallest measurements of the interior of the boat for Noah's Ark, but now we're going to take that a step further. Scratch out those numbers of 8,000, times them by almost 4. Kick it up to 30,000 kinds crammed in to the boat. That vessel on the screen right there could hold the equivalent of 522 full-size railroad boxcars. In layman's terms, that would be 125,000 full-size sheep. Most of these animal kinds, which again I bumped the number way up on, are nowhere close to the size of a full-sized sheep. It's a lot of boat. How many times does 30,000 go into 125,000? And 30,000 is 4 times what it's believed you would actually need. If you were to go with the largest measurements of a cubit, this number would be almost double that. And this would be more than 2 football fields. From a sheerly mathematical perspective, at the smallest measurements, yes, this boat will do the job. That's probably, bar none, the most stable design of a vessel that you could have. If that ship were to go almost vertical in any direction, it would still float. It's nearly impossible for that boat to flip. Proportionately speaking, he might not have gotten every animal herded onto the boat. Anything not inside, when those doors closed, might not be around anymore. You ever notice that sometimes animals just know that the storm is coming? And more than that, where the safety is? How do you imagine they do that? Now we know what our ages of ancient empires were, right? We've got the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and then some would argue we're in Rome phase 2. And these cultures, going all the way back to the beginning, were building architecture that engineers, they marvel. And how can this possibly be done? Even with equipment that we have today, the dynasties of ancient Egypt started at 2800 to 3000 BC, where you see your first little beginnings of the Empire of Egypt at Dynasty 0. In this Egyptian kings list, you see Seti and the young Ramses the Great. Was important to these ancient cultures to keep meticulous track of who was in charge and why. But looking back in ancient Egyptian prehistory, they also had a flood story in which the Egyptians believed that they were descendants from the man who survived the global flood on a boat that had saved all mankind. It is at that 3000 BC mark that we begin to see the ancient world come to life in this area right in here. Little settlements beginning to take shape. The Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, and over here alongside the Nile riverbank. The first trickles, the tiny inceptions of our known history start in that expanse of land right there. That's what they mean when you hear them say it goes dark after 3000 BC. Anything after that date is a big question mark. 3000 BC is not just when you see your first settlements beginning to take shape and rise into empires. That's also the area where the boat that saved all mankind is said to have landed. The legend of Yu. After the great worldwide flood, a man named Yu surveyed the land of China. In the Far East, the Jia dynasty, the first dynasty of ancient China, started its inception at 2000 BC. Many snakes and dragons were driven off from the marshlands. The peoples and lands of ancient India were divided up until the land was conquered by Alexander the Great between the years of 327 to 325 BC. And then, at the point of Alexander's death in 323 BC, you see the rise of the first empire of India, the Mauryan dynasty. That brings us back to our first empire, Egypt, the place where the first pyramids would begin to rise at about 2600 BC. And our oldest written king story, the 12 tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, called by some the oldest city in the world. Gilgamesh is listed in the Sumerian kings list as one of the first kings following the flood, living somewhere between 2700 and 2900 BC. From the land of Sumer in ancient Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh took 50 men to cut down cedar trees, and they were confronted by an ancient dinosaur dragon that they had to conquer. But it's after that that the story of Gilgamesh really begins. Gilgamesh would ultimately go on a journey to find one of the sons of the man who had built the boat that had saved all mankind. Many historians believe that it was Ham that Gilgamesh referenced in his 12 tablets. However, it is important to note that the use of the term son of in the ancient world, as is used in the Epic of Gilgamesh, can also mean grandson, great-grandson, or even great-great-great-great-great-grandson. But whatever the case, if Gilgamesh meets one of the sons of Noah about right here, then that means that the flood can't be too far that direction. Commentators speculate, conjecture that the flood occurred at 10,000 BC, and my question would be this: how come from this point here I can find cultures rising up into at least 6 different empires right in here, but on this side from here all the way back 3,000 to 10,000 BC, that is 7,000 years. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, from the same range of mountains that the boat is said to have landed in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, and then right over here, over to the Nile River in Egypt, little settlements begin to pop up at 3000 BC, is a flat line. But if I use the original Septuagint, translated from the Hebrew Torah to Precision Greek during the 3rd century BC under Ptolemy after Alexander the Great, or if you go with the original Hebrew Masoretic, you're going to come up with a flood date of 3000 BC. Maybe a touch more, but not much. And based on our current population charts, if you've got 7 billion people on the face of the planet in 2012 AD, and you hop back just 2,000 years, at year 0, the birth of Christ, you're at 200 million people. You've gone from 200 million bumped to 7 billion people. You hop back another 3,000 years, it is extremely easy to arrive at 8 people on the face of the planet Earth anywhere within this range. So was Noah's flood at 3000 BC? I wasn't there. You tell me. But I know this, that it's incredibly difficult for me to believe that seashells like this one here, or perhaps these, slowly crept their way up to the top of the highest mountain in the world, Everest, in the Himalayas. Or worse still, that there were guys on those mountain peaks tossing out seashells just for kicks. In reality, there are strange things, seashells, marine life, and fish fossils found in mountain ranges all across. The amazement of the whole earth. Speaking of fish that are out of place, 75 different kinds of full-size whales were found fossilized in a mass graveyard of whale fossils in the Atacama Desert, the most arid desert in the world, in Chile. How do you imagine 75 whales that size might end up in the middle of a desert? Perhaps they just forgot that they weren't dogs anymore. Sort of crawled out there. No matter how you cut it, our history has got a lot of curveballs in it. And at the center of our history, the very point right between BC, before Christ, and AD, after dead, Jesus Christ, a physical body, born of no social class, who would be covered more than any king that has lived or breathed or walked on the empires of this earth. There are at least 365 extremely specific prophecies about the coming of that child, given from more than 20 different prophets, including Elisha, Elijah, Daniel in ancient Babylon during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel, living in 600 BC, predicted the rise and fall of empires that would come after his time with 100% accuracy, including the birth and early death of Alexander the Great and the splitting of the whole empire into the lands of the 4 generals under Alexander after his death. And it's not just Zechariah that predicted the Messiah would enter Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. Daniel predicted the exact day and date nearly 600 years before Jesus rode that donkey through that front gate. Isaiah, who wrote the pages and prophecies seen on this recreation of a Dead Sea Scroll, lived in the 8th century BC, not only predicted the fall of the most powerful city in the world, Babylon, but predicted exactly how the city would fall and the name of the man who would do it, Cyrus. Then when Babylon fell, it was actually Daniel who walked out and handed King Cyrus a copy of Isaiah's scrolls written roughly 200 years beforehand, and went through and showed Cyrus his name in that scroll and exactly how the city was conquered, written by Isaiah roughly 200 years earlier, in fact detailing that the city would be taken by lowering the water and coming in. If you were King Cyrus, it'd give you a little bit of a shiver, wouldn't it? Isaiah would go on to prophesy in Isaiah 7:14 that the Messiah would be born of a virgin. Isaiah 9:6-7, that there would be a son called God. Isaiah 49:6, God's salvation would reach the ends of the earth. 35:4-6, the Messiah would perform many miracles. 40:1-5, he would be preceded by another prophet who would be a messenger. That'd be John the Baptist. 53:1-3, he'd be rejected. The Pharisees would not be happy campers about this. 53:4-6, he would die for the souls of all mankind. 53:12, he would be numbered amongst the transgressors. 53:9, that he would be buried in a rich man's tomb. This is the actual empty garden tomb where it's believed that Jesus was buried and then resurrected. How do you imagine these men could possibly know these things in advance? But it's not just Isaiah from the 8th century BC, or Micah who said verbatim that he would be born in Bethlehem, or Zechariah who prophesied to the penny how much Jesus would be sold out for 500 years in advance, that the Savior would be betrayed for exactly 30 shekels of silver. If I'm allowed to go outside biblical sources, then that number of 365 precise prophecies about Jesus Christ skyrockets. I can even go pre-flood on prophecies of Jesus Christ. Book of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, redundantly prophesied the coming of the Son of Man, the Lord of the sheep, the one for whom salvation would come, not only for the righteous before his coming, but all those afterwards, that through his name they shall be saved. Curiously enough, if I take the actual names in order from Adam all the way down to Noah, and then I look at the root meaning of those names in Genesis in order, this is what it reads. Man, appointed mortal sorrow, the blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing rest, and comfort. Thousands would come to hear Jesus speak. And he's not recorded as being out there selling tickets. Not just healing some who came, but healing all who came. On many occasions, the masses wanted to make him king, but that's not what he's recorded as having come to do. In many, many ancient cultures of the world, kings would sacrifice their subjects to underworld gods, spare no expense to feed darkness other people's lives. Jesus Christ would be the complete reverse of this. Remember I mentioned the underworld gods. What greater love could one have than to lay down their life for their friends? The eyes of the blind opened. This is exactly what made men like the Pharisees behind the scenes unhappy. Under the cover of night in the Garden of Gethsemane, when the high priest and his soldier minions come in to get Jesus, and Peter jumps up with the other disciples and he cuts off the high priest's ear, and Jesus stops him and says, "The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" Then, fascinatingly, the last miracle recorded by Jesus before that cross is to put back on the ear of his own enemy. This is the box holding the body of the high priest that demanded that Jesus be crucified. So I guess nobody's really confused about where he's at today. And here's the tomb where Jesus was for 3 days. "I am he that liveth and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and have the keys to death, hell, and the grave." After being resurrected, Jesus got together with the disciples and with the people for 40 days. From the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, Jesus ascended with a cast of heaven's hosts. That's why he's covered. Much more than any king, even Alexander the Great, who conquered 90% of the known world before his death. Nothing recorded as going on as usual. After the ascension of Jesus, as the word began to spread further and further, the Pharisees came out with a fierce rage. 10 of the 12 disciples would ultimately be systematically hunted out, tortured, and crucified in horrible, torturous ways. The Pharisees told Peter, the very one who had stepped out of the boat and walked on water for merely a moment, that if he would deny Jesus, that they would let him live. Peter declined that offer, refusing to recant one single word. But he did make a humble request that, having stood on the same ground as his Savior, Jesus Christ, that he was unworthy to be crucified in the same way as his King. Thus, Peter would step out of this life on a cross upside down. John was actually thrown into a boiling vat of hot oil, survived it. Perhaps John's purpose wasn't finished yet, and ended up on the island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. This would only get worse. Religious rulers, combined with the might of empires, would relentlessly hunt out to persecute in a unified effort. Anyone who knew Jesus, had talked to Jesus, spoke to Jesus, walked with Jesus, knew anything about Jesus, fed them to lions for sport, hunted them out to hang, crucifixions as far as the eye could see to strike fear in any heart that would dare utter the name Jesus. to keep you from ever getting one jot or tittle of those texts. They failed. Those pages were paid for with buckets of blood. But after the word spread to the farthest reaches of the globe, they did the next natural thing. Join them, and then go right back to business as usual. See, as long as you've painted a really nice cross on the shield, it makes it all better. Some even going so far as to define our earliest scientists heretics, which might play a wee role in the contentions between religion and science. Let's take a look at the universe. You know, the fascinating thing about heavenly bodies, they're very precise. You could almost set your clock to them. In fact, we do set our clocks to them. Now, the most predominant theorem on how all this got here is the Big Bang. The things it's got going for it is that we can conceptualize it, right? A big Star Wars style explosion in space. But here's the fascinating thing. It almost doesn't look like a random operation, does it? Everything that we're able to examine of the universe is based on a 3% sample of what we can see. So I've got a big Swiss watch, and I can see its parts, but I can't see the mass that's holding it together. So our current models of the universe are based on 96 to 97% of forces and mass that we can't find. In 1929, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe was stretching, it's expanding, and we know by the redshifts that the universe is accelerating. Now, before Hubble, there's only one other place I know of where you'll find talk about this business of the stretching of the heavens, and that would be in the Old Testament prophets. In fact, 17 times by my count. 17 times by guys separated by hundreds of years, all predicting that the universe was expanding. Those guys just seem to guess right an awful lot. Talk about redundancy. In fact, Isaiah in Isaiah 40:22 managed to say that the earth was round and that the heavens were stretching in the same sentence. You've probably heard it said by astronomers that they were shocked when it was first discovered that the universe was accelerating as opposed to de-accelerating. That's because this is exactly the reverse of what should happen if a big random space explosion had occurred. Shh, don't tell anyone I told you this. But the 73% of the dark energy that we invented at the same time that we discovered the universe was accelerating is to fix the problem that the 3% down here does exactly the opposite of what it should under the Big Bang model. It is he who sits above the sphere of earth, its inhabitants like grasshoppers, who stretches the heavens. That's 1,600 years before it was proven that the earth was round. But are there massive, unseen forces creating the precise clicks of the Swiss watch that we call a universe? Oh, indeed there are. A lot larger. And it does not appear to be a random kind of energy. It was in 1917 that Albert Einstein discovered the cosmological constant that he himself thought the numbers couldn't be right. But as we know today, it turns out he was right. Well, I mean, he's Einstein. In layman's terms, the finite construct of this thing that we call a universe and all of its majestic mechanical clockwork are fine-tuned to 1 part in a trillion. What I'm telling you is this: the finite precision construct of the entire universe, trillion, inside which is the Earth, which most definitely should not be here. Trillion, with the precision beings constructed of digital software, that would be you and I, with no spare mutating parts, that are consciously self-aware, comprised of cells that are more sophisticated than every factory on the face of the Earth, run by biological software, the cosmological constant, the fine-tuning precision of every piece of the universe is set to 1 part in 1 with 120 zeros behind it.
On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental.
In fact, it's the cosmological constant that caused some physicists to come up with what they call multi-universe theory, sometimes also called Elvis theory, meaning that if you had an infinite number of universes, perhaps in one of those universes you could have one where every single particle struck right every single time. Trillion, you've got to really want for there to be no creator. Pretty bad for the multi-universe theory. Trillion and 1 part in that entire monster of a number. Yeah, it doesn't look random. No matter how you cut it, you're in a finite construct. That, in and of itself, is powerful knowledge. Let's take a look at the particles of that construct. Within the area of just physics alone, there is probably nothing that will more quickly shove you into the metaphysical, the spiritual, and the dimensional than talking about that subatomic matrix of reality. This is not a trite issue. That is the framework, the actual particles upon which all of this sits, the paradox in every single piece of this place. Everything. It's not just that time and space dissolve into paradox. That's the wrong way to look at it. It's from paradox that time and space actually become. So this is the nucleus of my atom, with a cloud of superposition of possibilities all poking up all around it. An ocean of little intelligent dots, the 3-dimensional pixels of this place. A program writing in the material world. Reality on its finest scale can appear like a majesty of little waves, vibrations of notes. But that can be deceptive, because if one were to dive a little bit deeper, it's actually made of little bitty dots. In layman's terms, it's digital. It is not analog. Now, everything here in this place is actually quantized, the very frame fabric of the entire place. That's the term quantum mechanics. It's all in little bitty digital dots appearing out of seemingly thin space, doing it so fast that it creates the illusion of something solid, like this microphone here, to make up the fabric of the material world. All of it. The entire construct, the majesty which is even the finest little bitty pieces of the biology of this material world. Here's my ongoing music sheet of reality, and here is my particle was Max Planck, the actual father of quantum physics, who discovered Planck time, that time moves at 10 to the negative 43 seconds. This is not just the particle vibrating up and down or oscillating back and forth. This is literally the particle actually being the notes. This is what they mean when they say that the particle has no locality, that time and space dissolve at that point. It's literally appearing where it needs to be next. Matter is 10 to the negative 33 centimeters, give or take. Beginning as children, one of the first things that we learn is that time, from our perception, operates in a linear fashion. It only goes one way. You know, one could almost think that time and the particle pixels of reality itself were actually connected. Imagine that you're watching a parade, and here come the drummers and the other instrumentalists, and you're watching it one frame at a time from the ground. Just like the particles of this place that seem to be appearing and generated as we go along, so also is time, correct? So time is passing. One drummer person, one person stepping by at a time. So this is the beginning of an event, and this is the ending of an event. In fact, this could represent someone's entire lifetime. And imagine that you came up from above the parade, outside the construct of the entire universe. So you were outside time in a helicopter above the parade. And you could see the starting area, the staging area, watch the parade come around the buildings, and actually see where it ends, all simultaneously. But you and I are not outside of the construct. In fact, we're dead inside of it. You are never living in the past, nor are you ever living in the future. You are always standing on the most crucial moment, the moment that determines everything. No matter when it is always right now. Our body is made of the same particles that the whole matrix of the place is made of, with 5 little senses, which we seem mysteriously plugged in to consciously control, allowing us to poke around and examine the place on a finer scale, one little frame at a time. You are always standing on the razor's edge of where reality becomes. In fact, you're helping define it. Now, if the whole place is comprised of little particle pixel guys in every square inch, almost like a precise data live stream, that are not random and are appearing, trillions of them, creating even the tip of this pen precisely wherever they need to appear next, moving at a rate of 10 to the negative 43 seconds, creating in sheer unbelievable mass this thing that we call reality. But whatever's going on here is by no means a human hard drive. Little precision particle pixels in a pure live stream. And of course, as the final touch, construct is interactive. Like intelligent smart parts within the construct, as if not only fed by a source, but also each one being interactive, which would indeed cause the particles to behave in the intelligent yet strange ways that they do. Come to think of it, that would create time, space, and matter simultaneously, wouldn't it? A woman came up to me recently and she said, I had a dream, and in my dream the voice of the Lord, Yahweh, came to me, and he said, for men of science who seek even the tip of the finger of who I am, I have but 2 words, intrinsic energy. But you can call me Dad if you like. I think I nearly teared up when she said that to me. You know, it's fascinating. Before Jesus Christ left, he said, "In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go that I may prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also." What's amazing is that this place, even in its click, 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 declining state, is so majestic, which leads one to wonder what lies beyond the particles of this present illusion. So, every piece of everything here is not just playing little notes, it's playing little specific notes. So let's brass tacks this out. What's behind the veil of this present illusion? The other side of the place where reality becomes.
The only explanation which anyone could come up with is that the particles don't just exist in our universe. They flit into existence in other universes too. And there are an infinite number of these parallel universes.
We physicists now believe there are other soap bubbles out there. There's no longer a universe. There's no longer a one world. There are many worlds.
Essentially anything that can happen does happen in one of the alternatives, which means that superimposed on top of the universe that we know of is an alternative universe where Al Gore is president and Elvis Presley is still alive.
Do you find yourself agreeing with that concept of these multiple universes with many different incarnations, and maybe ours is one of many different types of universes?
You mean to ask me, is Elvis Presley alive in a parallel universe?
Yes!
The answer is maybe, possibly so.
I like it. I do. But I'm biased because I like Elvis. And who am I going to be to stand in the way of that man there having his own dimension? But on a physics perspective of the multi-universe Elvis theory of the many problems, there are three that come to mind fastest. Number one, with the multi-universe thing, you could not beat the dead horse into the ground faster and harder and completely kill Occam's razor than you do with the multi-universe thing. Occam's razor, of course, stating that the simplest answer tends to be the correct one. And with the raw data, you're living in the hours where you've got the raw data in your hands to actually look at these particles. Number two, of course, would be the sheer mathematical nightmare horror show of putting together that particular construct. You need a new universe. If you're intellectually honest, you need a new universe. Under the multi-universe theory, every time a particle flips, this means you need infinities of infinities of infinities of infinities of headaches, more infinities of universes, and writing it all out on paper. And finally, number three, last one that I'll give on that, even if you went through all of the mental acrobatics that are required to come up with the multi-universe theory, it still doesn't make time, space, or matter. But I still really, really like it because it's got Elvis in it. How could I not like it? Good work, guys. Let's take a look at another one.
Only conscious beings can be observers, then we're intimately hooked into the very existence of reality. Without us, there would just be this expanding superposition of possibilities with nothing definite ever actually happening.
If you want to see fear in a quantum physicist's eyes, just mention the words, the measurement problem. The measurement problem is this: an atom only appears in a particular place if you measure it. In other words, an atom is spread out all over the place until a conscious observer decides to look at it. So the act of measurement or observation creates the entire universe.
I like this one. I really do, a lot, for a number of reasons. But I might suggest this, that the consciousness does not create the particle or the material world. The consciousness is a prerequisite for doing the measurement at all. They're two entirely separate issues, the consciousness and the particle. You're actually looking at the very fabric, the place where reality becomes. When you're doing your measurement, you're looking at the first point where the particle is available for measurement. So, if I'm understanding some of our current conjectures properly, in the beginning, there was nothing. Nothing exploded and became sheer precision everything. The rocks began spitting out digital coding. The dogs became whales. The monkeys turned into people. And as the final touch, it's actually Elvis on the other side of reality. I find myself strangely hesitant to commit to all that. Perhaps finding myself in more agreement with Max Planck, the actual founder of quantum mechanics itself, who said, and I quote, "All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of the atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume that behind this force, the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." That was Max Planck, the actual father of quantum physics itself. Now, in the ancient world, they were talking about dimensions, but they were not drawing Elvis. In fact, they were drawing strange things in the skies, as well as biological creatures, anomalies that puzzle us, things that they said could step right out of thin air. Which is interesting because they were building architecture to their gods that baffles us, even to this very day. Now, I'm not finding on their walls where they're talking about their gods coming from other planets. They are redundantly talking about strange physical and spiritual beings, as well as strange things that seem to occupy the skies. Some of it able to pull tricks that seem to defy even the laws of physics. And deeper still, things claim to step through momentarily. Not dissimilar to claims, even right now today, disturbing claims within the arenas of psychology, claimed alien abductions, things said to literally pop up not from space, but right inside people's bedrooms, shadow people, body paralysis, serpent, snake, reptilian creatures, not dissimilar to the wisdom serpents throughout not just Egypt, but the entirety of the ancient world. Anunnaki, the biblical sons of Anak, or also called the Nephilim, both before and after the flood, as is recorded by the Sumerian texts. You know, when I think about it, there are a lot of things in the ancient world that have this sort of reptile, cold-blooded twist to them. Serpent's sort of a strange animal for a king to get his wisdom from, don't you think? And if one were to go from the lights that appear in the sky down through the fringe level stuff and then delve into the furthest regions of the occult, the accounts only become more discomforting. They believe that the tentacles of things that might be as close as the air between your fingers as you reach out into empty space. And they built the largest temples on earth to things they believed dwelled in a dark realm. In fact, I would venture to guess that there are those right on the other side of this camera who have had experiences, both light and dark, that they might not share with everyone. But when thinking about just things that seem to appear in the sky, boy, that's a lot of little dots out there, isn't it? And then if the same type of activity is recorded from the very earliest parts of time all the way to present day, one might almost think that the phenomenon was, I don't know, localized? Well, if they were coming from other planets, you would think we would sense the traffic. And on top of that, if you've got something that just steps right out into reality or just appears in the skies, the question really does become, where is it when you don't see it? In fact, they were quite specific about where their gods came from. Not just in Egypt, not just in Babylon. Cultures all across this globe believed that their gods were in the underworld. Hell, Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, the world of serpents. In fact, the beginning of many a king's reign began with the invocation ceremony, the actual calling in from the underworld, that the Pharaoh would invite the embodiment of the spirit of an underworld god to consciously rule from below through the mind and body of the Pharaoh himself on the empires above. And it's not just the ancient world. John Dee, the head intelligence officer under Queen Elizabeth I, did intense occult rituals and ceremonies with the full funding and backing of the empire, literally cataloging entire hierarchies of entities, some of which looked exactly like what we may define today as an alien. The official statement of the empire was that Dee was gaining wisdom from angels. Of course, after John Dee's death, his diary told a different story, repeatedly saying, "I believe they're lying to me. These things are not angels. They're demons." That was John Dee. I'm quoting an occultist from present day who stated, and I quote, "If one were to peer into their world by portal of spirit, you could easily perceive it as nothing less than a madness of monsters, insects crawling over each other for merely a breath. Be not deceived. These things are highly sophisticated, acting out their fantasies through the minds of men. It is by this mechanism that an invisible enemy systematically rules all flesh, its best weapon being the single fact that most don't even understand that the patient predator behind the mask even exists." And when you're dealing with the occult, this side of the flood, all roads seem to lead to the ancient empire of Babylon, rising up at the inception of our earliest empires in Samaria and down here in Egypt, where the wisdom serpents would begin whispering in the ears of kings. Now, when the first name of the god is underworld, doesn't that tend to mean that the god is already beneath you? Things that have already found their way into the recycle bin of reality. Perhaps the drainage canal for stuff that tends to bite the hand that feeds. Was Jesus Christ who said hell was never made for mankind. I wouldn't have it any other way than to end this video with the words of John chapter 3. Was when Nicodemus, a wealthy Pharisee, came to see Jesus under the cover of night so that no one would see. And he asked, how may one gain eternal life? And Jesus replied, are you not teacher of all Israel, and yet you do not know these simple things? Does the wind not blow where it wishes, and you neither see where it comes or to where it goes, yet you know it's there? I tell you, so also are those who are born of spirit. So do not marvel when I say, you must be born again. Now in the Greek, born again means born from above, or more precisely, born from the place where this place comes from. A special thanks to every man and woman of science, as well as, and more primarily, a special thanks and dedication at the end of this video, The Theory of Everything, to Jesus Christ. And a special thanks for an event that occurred. Funny in this life how, in merely a moment, the way that you viewed everything can change. Hey, this is Trey Smith. I want to thank you for watching this video, The Theory of Everything. Feel free to visit godinanutshell.com, where you can get downloadable copies of this video with zero advertising inside the video, as well as buy the actual DVD, which looks something like this. Every DVD sold helps future videos, so a special thanks to every single person out there that takes the time to purchase one for themselves, for their family members, for a college student, whoever you may get a copy for. Also, I am the author of Thieves, One Dirty TV Pastor and the Man Who Robbed Him. In 1999, I did, embarrassingly enough, commit a safe robbery on a television pastor named Mike Murdoch. Grew up with his son. Horribly embarrassing story for me. Thrill ride for you. Take a second to check that out. You can find that on godinanutshell.com or go over to readthieves.com. readthieves.com. Here's an article about the book. There's an image of me right there that was drawn by D Magazine, one of the largest magazines in Dallas, Texas, maybe the largest. You can see there, and Mike Murdoch looks sort of angry. There's me running with the safe from Mike Murdoch. So, if you're curious about that story or what all went down and how that could have possibly occurred, you're in luck. Here's a clip.
Thieves by Trey Smith. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold.
I've been on radio and TV for 20 years. And Trey, first, as far as the book itself, I'll give you an example. My producer, Will Duffy, his wife, Danielle, was in the hospital to give birth. And they had some time, so Will is reading aloud Thieves. And not only his wife becomes addicted to it, but people in neighboring beds and neighboring rooms all sat in to listen to Thieves being read. It's like Danielle wanted to delay labor because she was so fascinated.
Thieves was me pouring literally my heart out day after day. These were all written in a jail cell. And guards used to pay me when they were on shift. They would give me extra lunch trays to read them this book. So Thieves was originally paid for with jailhouse lunch trays. And then, after the safe robbery, when I'm on the run from a television pastor in Mexico, it really kicks into high octane. Sometimes I would just stop and say to myself, there's not a lot of really great ways for any of this to end. Crazy as it seems, though, it did all end well. I promise. Thank God for that. I'm pretty certain that you're not going to find anything like this anywhere. I wanted to tack a note onto the end of this video and state to you that that book, Thieves, from start to finish, no matter how fun it might be to read, does not in any way represent who I am today. And more than that, I've not only asked forgiveness in my own heart, but from a great many parties who are in that book and who are not in that book that I needed to ask for forgiveness from. More than that, I'd like to give a special thank you to ministries, men and women of faith, churches and organizations all across this United States, because they are not represented. The hearts of the people are not represented by the few that are just take. I have seen so many, both great and small ministries, who no matter who they are, they would give you the last shirt off of their back. And I want to thank them. I'm Trey Smith. God bless every one of you.
Please subscribe to our backup channels, Net4Truth USA 2 Patriot channel, BitChute.com/net4Truth USA, and drop.space/@Net4Truth USA. We fly so close to the target, we are on our 5th fighter jet. We will be relentless and persistent until the enemies of freedom are defeated. You can support this channel by using the links in the description, but for a $100 donation, I will personally send you a autographed hardcover special edition copy of Land of Childhood's Fears. Also, visit my bookstore at lulu.com/Net4Truth USA. If you are viewing this video on BitChute, you can use the links in the description to support us, or simply click the green $ dot on our video to support this channel. Thank you. Links are in the description section.